Ready or share with her?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. All right, folks. Welcome. I would imagine these sessions are probably getting smaller and smaller as the amount of new PMs towards the end of the year sort of becomes less and less. But for those of you who have joined, welcome. Thanks for joining the call today. I will go over a little bit of the agenda and so forth, but just some rules of engagement. And this is consistent with the way we've held this training over the course of the months. But if you could, any questions that you have throughout, we will address them, but we're going to do it at the end of each session. So if you could share those in the chat, we will make sure to circle back and get you answers to those questions, but we want to just flow through the material first and then come back around for the questions. If we miss any questions or need any additional follow-up, we do have someone who will be taking those notes and making sure those follow-ups do occur. And then if you could make sure if you dialed in and your name is not appearing, that you change it to display your name so that the folks in the PMO ops team can give you credit for this course. And with that, we will begin. So our agenda for today is going to be to do a quick introduction. It'll be about a 30-minute introduction. Then we will cover the stage gate process, which is the project management framework to set expectations on how you're going to manage and deliver your projects. We will then go through status reporting, which status reporting is going to show you not just the content that you should be including, but also the tools that we're using to complete those status reports on a bi-weekly basis. We will talk a little bit about portfolio health, which is how the status reports get synthesized into a dashboard that is utilized to report out to leadership, the overall portfolio status, and then what areas we should focus our attention from a discussion standpoint at a leadership level. So kind of where our problem areas are, where are areas they can help, where are those barriers that we need help removing. So we'll go over that a little. And then we'll take a quick break for about 15 minutes. And then come back and talk about risk and issue management. So the expectations around how you manage your risk and issues, as well as where you put those in the tool. And then we normally would do estimation. However, today we're going to cancel that session. So if you had the 4-hour block on your calendar, you are now going to get an hour back. So that's the good news. The good news is you get an hour back. The bad news is we will not be able to cover estimation today. However, there will be a special topic session that will be conducted in January to dive into that in the tool and maybe some revisions to the tool that's being made now. So that's our agenda. We may take a break somewhere else in there if it seems like we need it or we have the additional time. So just to give you a little bit of the history and the journey that we've been on since October of last year. So October of last year, we were engaged by the IT leadership to help with the strategic vision of creating project excellence in the IT portfolio delivery. So a new CIDO was introduced, came in middle of last year. At that point, he recognize some opportunity for basically centralizing a project management office that would give some strategic benefit and create better visibility, better project, more, I guess, predictable project delivery. So really there was a vision of getting transparency and accountability within that investment portfolio or that project portfolio delivery. Part of that solution would be to build that mature IT EPMO organization and toolbox, some of which is in place today, but will continue to advance capability-wise, organizationally over the next few years. So this is not a one-year journey. We're not at the end. This is essentially the first year into that journey. And then provide that visibility for oversight and escalation, which is part of the portfolio health we'll talk about. So giving leadership and understanding and appreciation for the health of the projects so that they can provide additional support to the teams where needed. Methodology, so this is providing a standardized way of doing project management and setting expectations of what the project manager will do to deliver those projects. It is not a one size fits all, so we will go through some categorization that happens. So if your project is smaller, primarily hardware, not as complex, not as visible, how do you tailor this to fit your project? To provide some governance within the organization, but also you'll start to see compliance reporting, things like that, to make sure we're following this methodology, as well as portfolio management and portfolio health reporting and metrics at all level, at the project level as well as the portfolio level. Organizationally, we have a new PMO organization that was just put in place this year, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. It is a centralized function that supports all the towers and everything IT is delivering, and with the intent of standardizing as much as possible the way we deliver projects. And then automation, and this is one that's a little bit lagging from our original plan and our original roadmap. There is a project that is happening to replace some of the things that happen in ServiceNow in a less streamlined way and replace them with something that is more streamlined called PTS. And that is happening now, but it's going to come in stages. And it's my understanding in the next month, there'll be some communication around what are those stages, what's being delivered when. There was a preview of just the business case functionality, I think last month, for the PMs on the training calendar, and I believe that was recorded, but you'll see more of that coming as they get closer to being ready to start test, pilot, and release some of that functionality. So automation was a focus and part of that vision. We're stepping a little bit slower on those. So once that vision was set, KPMG came in, which is who I work for, and brought in a capabilities model as a starting point. So this is the methodology that was used to start designing the project management processes and that framework that we'll go through today. So essentially it accounts for 4 different areas of project management with 16 capability areas within those 4 areas, which should include everything from planning your portfolio to executing your portfolio, reporting on it, monitoring it, and so forth. So that was our starting point. Of those 16 capabilities, what we did is said, okay, we can't do all at once. We assessed the maturity of those capabilities across all 16. As you can guess, with an organization that did not have a centralized PMO, we're kind of at the starting point with almost all of them. So we said, okay, well, now we need to prioritize these and come up with a way to set a scope for just phase 1. As you'll see, when we went through that exercise with PSEG, the phase 1 deliverables pretty closely relate to what you're going to review today, meaning this is the things that were set the foundation for all the other capabilities. So having that framework, having that single way of managing and delivering projects from a deliverable standpoint, so that stage gate process kind of sets that framework and sets that structure. Having schedule and cost management, which now we have schedulers and controllers assisting with that as well. And then setting risk and issues management and project status reporting that allows us to get the visibility into the projects and start creating dashboards for the portfolio. So the initial step was to set priorities where we thought things need to be created in order to create a foundation so that we can continually improve on these other capabilities. We have already reassessed these capabilities to plan out a phase 2, which the PMO is going to work on, is probably another phase starting, I think, later in 2022. So there has been a reassessment since we rolled these out and a reprioritization that will drive a roadmap going into end of next year, 2023 and on. So with that, as I mentioned, a centralized IT EPMO was set up. This organization is managed, or senior director for this project services organization is Rich Brenton. Rich is over the IT EPMO. He is also over the Energy Cloud TMO, which for those that don't know, a PMO is really that function that is set up that is a permanent centralized function in your organization. A TMO is a transformation management office, meaning I have just this one big transformation that has a finite start and end, that it has so many projects and so many programs underneath that it's going to require next level reporting, next level management. So you take those from your portfolio and treat them as kind of a special group that also follows what is put in place by your PMO, but just has additional requirements that generally, your regular IT projects will not have. So so this is the structure that was set up. Upasana is the manager over operations. Nicole Johnson is the manager over scheduling, and they are currently looking for a manager over the controllers. Operations is really responsible for that portfolio level management and planning. They are the governance over all the process, templates, tools, and compliance, as well as training, communications, metrics, and reporting. So they also do some vendor management and things like this currently, but that is your operations function. Scheduling is really that resource cost loaded schedule management. So helping to get that plan in place for the projects, working with those PMs, looking at the resource capacity in that, looking at integrated planning, both inside the project as well as external to the project. And then your controlling is really all of that cost management. So your budget, accruals, cash flow, forecasting, all of that. These two functions, scheduling, controlling, support the project manager directly, meaning you have an assignment for each of these to your project. You have a scheduler and you have a controller. Operations is a more shared service. So operations is really supporting all the projects across the board. They're not directly assigned to a project. So that's the EPMO. So to talk a little bit about those three roles I just mentioned, which are key for project delivery. So your project manager is your ultimate responsible person for successful delivery of the project. The project manager is, they're understanding the estimate that was put together and approved as part of the business case, understands the benefits that were articulated and the value that was articulated for this project in the business case to ensure that we actually deliver that. Really is that main person responsible for delivery of the project. The scheduler and controller are supporting roles. So I just want to be clear, they have their responsibilities, but they are supporting roles. The project manager is ultimately responsible for delivery. The scheduler will work with that PM, better understand kind of that initial milestone plan, better understand what activities and deliverables need to be built into the schedule. How do we resource load them? So what are the activities? Who's going to do those activities? And then how much does that particular activity cost to start building in costs to your schedule? And then your controller is really the person who's there helping you understand. Essentially, when you give them the estimate, they'll build out a cost workbook that'll say, here's my original budget, here's kind of the breakdown. So those cost categories for each, what part of this is capital, what part of this is O&M. And then once they have that, they on a weekly and monthly basis will be pulling your actuals from SAP, while the project manager is responsible for processing the invoices, because you're ultimately responsible for saying, yes, that work was done, let's pay this vendor. You're responsible for that vendor relationship. The controller, being hopefully copied on all of that and aware of it, is going to be monitoring to see when things have paid. If the work was done and we haven't been paid, they're going to propose that as part of the accruals. They're going to look at your forecast and be able to say, hey, I saw actuals come through. You said it was going to cost 40 hours to do this, which equated to this many dollars. They only invoiced us for 20. If all the work was done, we're coming in about 20 under. Do we need to do anything to adjust the forecast if our burn rate is really reflective of the 20 and not the 40? So they should be looking at that financial information, making observations, and bringing that back to the PM for discussion. So if it looks like our burn rate on one vendor is much higher than we anticipated, is this going to blow the budget out? Or is this like a 1 month thing and we just need to account for it in our variance explanations? So they really should be helping by doing analysis of that financial information as it's flowing through the SAP system and looking at what your plan was, and then providing that insight to the project manager for the project manager to make decisions. So it's 3 very important roles, but the PM being ultimately responsible, with your scheduler and your controller being in those support roles, and they really should act as analysts. They should be diving into your schedule, diving into your cost workbook, and providing insight back to you. They should also be proposing to you the accruals. They should be proposing to you your forecast, bringing issues that they see forward and telling you, okay, well, this is what's happening. How do you want to handle this? So as a PM, you make decisions around that, but they should be really providing you insight. And that should be, once you have your schedule established and your cost workbook established, they should be able to do that without you having to, as a PM, hold their hand after that. As well as the scheduler and controller should be working pretty closely together to determine if the scheduler says, hey, we're going to get all this work done in December. It looks like it's going to move out to January. Look at that and say, oh, well, that's going to move this vendor cost to my forecast and my cost workbook, and talk to the PM about the impacts that.
Hey, Sharon, I'm not sure if it's just me or everybody, but I'm losing when you're talking in between.
Yeah, it's cutting off.
Yeah, you're not continuous.
Okay, I'm not sure what to do about that. I'm connected to the office.
Yeah, sometimes it's fully clear, like full sentence, and suddenly you drop like one sentence and it's coming back.
Something that I should repeat? Is there anything that jumps out?
Just last few lines of what you said.
Okay, yeah. So the PM being ultimately responsible, scheduler and controller should be really analysts for you. So once you establish your schedule, establish your cost workbook, they really should be able to provide insights based on working together, understanding when delays happen in a schedule, how does that impact your costs, and then taking that information back to you as the PM, so that you're focused on driving the work and making decisions. And they should really be the ones who are focused on mastering the schedule and cost, and then impacts between those two.
Thank you.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Stop me if anything gets like, iffy along the way, and I'd be happy to repeat, because I'm just not sure how else to get better.
No, that's okay. I thought maybe it's just me for first few times, and then I thought, okay, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Stop me if I need to repeat.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it's important for the PMs to understand the costs associated with the controller and scheduler. So there has been a model put in place, and really we'll go through what each of these categories are in much more detail in the stage gate process. But from a budgeting perspective and an estimation perspective, here's what you should be estimating and budgeting for your projects. If it's a small, under $500,000 project, your scheduler controller should be no more than 2 hours a week on your project. And just so, because I get this question a lot, the reason you still need it on a very small project is more for the portfolio benefit, because eventually these schedules will be utilized to determine capacity for doing projects. So if your capacity is not built into, your resource needs is not built into your schedule, it won't be accounted for when they look at, is a resource overloaded or not. So we need that information in P6 to be in, which is our scheduling tool, in order for us to know, have your representation of your project when we look at the full picture of everything IT is working on and everything our resources are working on. And then when we look at metrics around the entire cost of our portfolio, we need your projects represented. So if it's a small project, it's a very small cost associated and very few hours, because it's more about having it represented in the portfolio than it is, you know, about a lot of detailed analysis that they would have to do. And that's why we also have, you know, a very small portion. So even if it's small, we still need someone assigned specifically for that reason.
Are
So
we
this,
following this right now, like for the current projects?
we are.
Because I do have a couple of projects and I was told that the cost is divided between the number of projects that they have as a scheduler and controller, not based on the funding on the project.
That is inaccurate. So whoever said that, feel free to send them to me.
Okay.
Or Upasana. That is not correct.
Okay,
This
okay. Yeah, I
model
do.
is where
Yeah.
the charges should be.
Got it, because yeah, I do have my budget going towards them, which is more than what I see here for a third gate, which is 5 million to 1 million.
Yep,
Okay.
definitely send that over. Mhm.
Okay, I'll talk to Upasana. Thank you so much.
Okay, so this is the guidelines, and if you're seeing anything different, definitely bring it to Upasana or myself or Nicole, and we'll try and get that corrected.
Yeah, just, can we go back 1 second, Sharon?
Can we?
I'm not sure this is being followed yet. And
Okay.
I say that I've been working with, so I've got an OMS project. I got a 40 million plus project. I don't have dedicated resources for schedulers and controllers. They're shared amongst the program.
Can you
And I
send?
think that's what's happening. Yeah, I think that's what's happening across the board.
It's not,
just because of the
like
lack of resources.
EPMO has dedicated, AMI has dedicated, so it's being followed. If there's cases out there where it's not, please send that to myself or Upasana, and we'd be happy to jump in, because there may be some project specific things that for some reason there's a variation and we need to address it, but it is being followed. So if there, you know, if somehow your project got some, you know, not correct allocation or not correct something, please send that on. We are following it. And I even went through on the controller assignments, looked at the dollar amount that was sitting out in ServiceNow for the project, and then allocated controllers specifically based on the dollar value and the category of those projects. So I know it's being followed, but we may have some exceptions. So please send that if you have it. And I've even communicated multiple times to controllers, this is our model. If you only have 2 projects and you're not fully allocated, we need to get you fully allocated, but those 2 projects should be charged based on this. And you should be working it based on this. So charging for 8 hours if it's between 5 and 1 million, and actually working 8 hours if it's between 5 and 1 million.
Yeah, I'm definitely paying like around 6K for my funding instead of 2. So yeah, I have to look into it.
Yeah, please send that over to me.
Yeah, thank you.
And Upasana is really the one who is over the portfolio, the plan. So she lets Nicole and I know if we need to assign someone. And by the way, I'm just helping with the controllers. I'm not the controller manager. It's just until they hire someone, I'm trying to help with assignments and so forth. But I have a full plan of like, here's all the schedulers, here's all the projects that Upasana has sent over to me to be assigned. Here's the dollar amount, and then they are allocated based on those dollar amounts until they hit 40 hours a week.
No, I understand. Yeah, this is the first time I'm looking at this, because I did ask this question when the controller was assigned to my project, because I had to forecast their funding as well. So that's why I got curious.
So this has been communicated in the newsletter, and it's also, I think they did send a special communication out and it's sitting on the SharePoint site. So if anyone is missing any of that information, definitely let us know. Because it may be you're missing the communication, like maybe you're not on the distribution or something.
I'm not sure if it's Venti employees versus contractors, but I think I did miss it. So I'll get back to SharePoint and see if I can find it.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, definitely let me know too if you need me to
Yeah.
direct. Sure. Okay, the SharePoint site, so that's a good lead into this. So there is a SharePoint site out there. I will tell you, going into next year, we will be cleaning this up. We're going to use, I think, last time I talked to Upasana, they were looking at using Source, setting up a page where it just creates the links into this, so you're not like wading through folders on a SharePoint site. You're actually like, you can look for what you need, search for it, and then have a link into this. But there is a SharePoint site for IT EPMO that has playbooks and processes, which everything I cover with you will be sitting out there in a playbook or a process. There's the tools and templates, which everything I refer to in the next session on the stage gate process, all the deliverables have templates out there, as well as training material, which is recorded sessions that we did across the months. I think first one happened in like February or March, where you can go back and listen to, you know, a recording of a previous session. And then there's a stage gate process quick reference, which is just, you know, kind of giving you that initial high level framework and what I would say project managers should keep really close, that we'll cover in the next session as well. There is a quarterly training calendar that's out there that the ops team manages. So you will, you know, you can click into that and see when all these trainings, even special topics. I think we just did one last time on utilities financials. So for PMs or controllers or anyone who's not coming in with utilities background, they talk specifically about how funding happens for a utility company, which offers good insight as to like why it's not okay to go under as well as over, and you know, because we're not, you know, things, the way utility companies get their budget set and get their revenue set as a regulated utility is very different than a commercial, you know, open market sort of organization. There's also access to the latest quarterly newsletter out there, so you should be able to see the newsletter that went out. I think it went out in November. And then, you know, so you also have a link here to contact the PMO if you have questions. There is also office hours available every Thursday from 10 to 11. So these are kind of like just resources to help you. I'm hoping this will get much more clean and asset wise going forward. Again, office hours, email address, and you can also enter a ServiceNow ticket if you have specific requests for the PMO. Hope that helps. Okay, and with that, that's the remainder of the intro. Did we have any questions in the chat? I didn't see any. I think folks were just asking. Okay. So I will move on to the stage. Well, I'll open it up first. We have like a minute or so here. Any questions that I didn't answer before we move on? All right.
Okay.
Well, why don't we go ahead and head into stage gate and share my screen, which is probably the most important thing for both PMs as well as, quite honestly, schedulers and controllers to understand as well, because, you know, this is the framework that the PM should be living within, but your schedule should be built based on this, as well as your costs are should be incurred based on this life cycle of a project. So I think it's important for all to understand, even though this is really kind of the reference guide for a PM. So it really is like your key guide. So when you're thinking about putting your plan together, your plan should be focused on these stages, these deliverables, and then the activities that it takes to get to, through each stage. And some of the things in the checklist at the bottom you'll see are actually activities. And again, we realize this is not a one size fits all. So we do give some guidelines as well as how to tailor, and they depend on two things. One is what SDLC are you using? Is it waterfall? Is it agile? That sort of thing. And then the second is, what is your category of project? So a project that is a routine fiber, in roll out is just different geographic locations, not redesigning anything, should require a lot less rigor than a project that is a new SAP implementation, right? Where you got design, lots of integrations, lots of vendors are potentially involved, things like that. So this is really meant to accommodate that. Going forward, you're going to start to see a lot of compliance reporting around this. This was something we had targeted for 2021. It didn't really get rolled out due to some limitations with resources on teams, but coming into 2022, I know there's going to be a heavy push to make sure projects are following this, that they have gates, target gate dates, and that they're keeping those dates and flowing through their project per that plan. It'll also be built, like I said, into your schedules in P6. And just so you know, there will be reporting that'll be coming out of P6 that help us appreciate where each project is in this life cycle. So it'll help us understand which projects are early, which projects are in design, kind of where you are in that life cycle. And then it will even drive kind of what engagements you need from other teams, like as you hit cyber needs and things like that. There are certain deliverables in the stages. There's going to be reporting that's going to come out of that P6 tool to help us understand when you're going to need that based on you following the stage gate process. So I'll get started here. So just to kind of help you guys understand how to read this if you've never followed a stage gate process before. So this is the one for waterfall, and I'll go over the agile one next. Across the top here are your stages: create concept, develop business case, project initiation, develop initial design, direct and manage, and post deployment. So these are the stages every waterfall project should go through. The diamonds are the gates: review concept, business case challenge, initial readiness, initial design, definitive estimate, production readiness, and then closeout. The gates are actual stopping points where you should be stopping and doing two things. Well, should I say you and your steering committee should be doing two things. One is confirming that the maturity of your deliverables for your project are in a place that you are ready to move to the next stage. Meaning if you're in develop initial design and your requirements still haven't been signed off on, functionally you're not 100% set, you should not be moving into design because you don't have enough information to not have to rework that design multiple times. You should have that requirement set and you use that as the what we want to deliver, so you can now design the how we're going to deliver it. So this, at each of these gates, you should be stopping and saying, do I have the sufficient information to start the next stage? And are my deliverables wrapped and essentially ready to go? So I have the right approvals, the right, everyone's engaged, the right extent to move to the next stage. The second thing you should be thinking about when you talk to your steering committee is, now that I have more information from this stage, has anything changed that you need to know about that maybe we need to decide? Are we still headed in the right direction? So if you get through your develop initial design and realize, hey, I've been working with the vendor, we can't really implement this in a way that delivers what you originally said we were going to do in the business case. Do we want to keep going? Or do we need to think about changing course? So at each time you stop at a gate, you should be looking at, do I have enough information? And are my deliverables in a place where I'm ready to move to the next stage? And also, has anything changed from when I originally started, really originally had a business case delivered for this that could potentially have leadership questioning whether we should continue along with this project or this path. So this should be a check-in that allows you to do that. So the first two stages are really like your so the first create concept, I would say most of you probably won't even be engaged at that point as a PM. This is really either when the business gets, products life cycle is being sunsetted and we need to address that, or somewhere in that life cycle you have something to address. There's a new business need, either market disruptor or just something happening in the business that they have a need or an idea for a way to resolve some either challenges or opportunities with an IT project, or at some compliance driven need that a project needs to be created to address some compliance issues or prepare for compliance of some new regulation or that kind of thing. So create concept is usually pretty early on, where they're just deciding, is this idea merit us investing in creating a business case? Business case, you could have a PM depending on the size of it and complexity of putting the business case together. Generally, the PM at minimum comes in during project initiation, but may come in during business case depending on bandwidth of the folks like GPMs and tower leads and things like that. But business case is really when you create a sound view of not just what we should do, and I say sound view, at least enough to have the conversation. You should not have a design at this point. I'll go through the estimate maturity at the bottom. This is not like bring in a vendor, get to plus or minus 10%. This really is ROM level estimate to provide a solution to a problem where you can articulate the problem, articulate the possible solutions. It doesn't have to say, I'm going to implement this with this vendor. It's got to say, I'm going to solve this problem by putting a system in place that does these types of things, which will solve that problem. Putting together that ROM level estimate. So really at this point, you're talking about cost benefit analysis, right? And then understanding the risk with delivering that so that you can get in front of a group of folks that control the budget to say, this is why this should be done. And here's all the things you need to consider before you decide if we're going to invest in this or not. So this is really just a business case level. This goes to a business case challenge team within IT. That does not mean you're always requesting funding from that team. The funding may come from outside. The funding may come from the utility review board, but you still have to go to BCT because we have to make sure two things. It aligns with where we want to head from a technology standpoint strategically, and that we have the capacity to do it, right? So you can have all the funding if you want. If you don't have people and no way to get it done, you got a problem. If you want to get it done and 3 business units all want to do the same document management, but they want 3 different solutions, IT has a responsibility to PSEG to come in with a consolidated way of doing this and recommend, so really it's about aligning on the strategic, the strategy, and then aligning on this is something we want to and we should be doing as an IT organization. In some cases, this will be for funding if it's an IT funded project, but not always. So just so you know, this business case challenge team, you should be doing this before you go to URB, just because you want to make sure that you don't need to modify your URB request to fit input from that IT leadership. So this challenge team is made up of all your senior leadership in IT, as well as there's other folks from cyber and other, supply chain, I think, and just other related or support organizations that should be able to provide insight to you as well. on possibly things you need to consider before you move forward with this project. So that's the business case stage. And as you can see, there's checklists. So there's an objective across, and then there's a checklist. This checklist is deliverables or activities you should have completed before you're ready to move to the next. So once you have a business case completed and approved through this business case challenge gate, and there's a whole process here that is, there's more information on in the SharePoint site, but there's a business case template, there's a business case process and things like that that we can point you towards. The next stage would be project initiation. Project initiation is, okay, I have funding, it's approved to be added to the portfolio. Now I need to start planning. I need to start putting a schedule together. I need to complete my project categorization to make sure I know how much rigor I need to add to this. I need to start my quality risk or complete qualitative risk assessment, hold the project kickoff, get my steering committee put together, create my initial cyber risk assessment with the cyber team. So you'll start create my project execution plan, which is a combination of traditionally like a charter, as well as your governance oversight execution support model. So there, and again, you can, in our tools and templates folder on SharePoint, you'll find a project execution plan template. You'll find some initial steering committee meeting, but templates of what you can use, even a goes template out there if you want to add that to your steering committee deck. So you have a change management plan template, although it just is really assigning an owner in project initiation. So as you finish up all of these, you're like, okay, I'm ready to hit my next gate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you go through gate reviews before you go to the next stage to get the approval. But for now, just understand there's a gate. It's really a stopping point where you do those checks, and then you'll get approval from your steering committee as well as the PMO. Hey, I'm ready to move to the next stage. So you go through.
Hey, Sharon. Hey, Sharon.
Yes.
This might be a time to address a question in the chat. We've been holding a question in the chat for you. Marty asks if there will be specific P6 training offered in addition to making the tool available. Can you address that, since you've just mentioned this is the point at which you would start developing the schedule?
So your scheduler is the one who's in P6. PMs do not create schedules in P6. You will work with your scheduler, who will get your schedule in P6 and then produce reports for you as output. So there will not be PM access to P6. Okay, so now like you've passed this gate, you're in develop initial design. Develop initial design is what I would traditionally say has been your analysis stage. That is where you start thinking about what are my detailed requirements, getting those approved. You start creating kind of that high level design, that high level picture, not detail, but just high level, so that you can drive through all of those requirements. You create your test management plan. This is not test cases. This is how am I going to manage tests? Is it multiple test cycles? Who's going to manage that? Who's going to be my testers? Who's going to create my cases? Who's going to, so it's really starting, how am I going to report out, that sort of thing. And there is a template for that. You start looking at your organizational change management needs, getting that very well defined. So what communications, what trainings, who's going to do them, and who's going to manage that as well. On very large engagement, very large projects, you may have a person who is a change management, who's a change manager, or a test manager. For smaller ones, you may not have that, and that's a role the PM may take on, or someone else on the team, a technical lead may take on, or that kind of thing. So this is really when you're figuring that out. Another big thing, and we'll cover a little bit more in detail later, is this is where you start doing quantitative risk assessments. A quantitative risk assessment requires that you not only identify a risk, but you say, what is your probability? What is my impact? But then you do like high, medium, low impacts. And then you start thinking about, okay, how do I calculate a contingency budget for this particular risk? So if this happens, what is my likely cost and how much will that likely cost me in contingency? So you start looking at, hey, do I have enough contingency across all of my risks? You know, if you're thinking about managing a contingency budget to the risks that are there, you start assigning end dates to your risk. So, you know, if my risk is in, you know, design and I'm finished design on April 30th, then that risk ends April 30th, right? So you start thinking about, okay, where do my major risk exist and what time frame, and then when do things start close out, and then the project starts becoming less implementation risk associated with it. So we will go dive into risk management a little bit later, but this is where you go from qualitative to quantitative risk assessments. Eventually, we're hoping to get to a place where your risks are associated with activities in your schedule, not just outside where you're thinking about it, but this specific activity has this risk associated that could cost us this much money. So once you get past analysis and you have a security architecture review here, as well as your requirements traceability, then you'll get into design. So now I know what I need to create to solve this problem. Design is how am I going to create that? So you start thinking about your very detailed system design specifications. You update that risk traceability to say, I have a requirement, here's my design component that is going to address it, and then here's my test case that's going to test to make sure I delivered it, so that you can ensure that all your requirements have been met when you finish your testing. So it creates that traceability through requirements, design, and then testing. You're going to start creating your test cases here, communication plans, and this is where you're going to heavily engage cyber to start looking at your security architecture, design review, and any additional security requirements that may come out of the solution that you designed. So you may design a solution where cyber is going to say, based on that risk, we may need additional pen testing, or we may need additional cyber testing. This is where you would really dive in with cyber to figure that out. And then once you have that design completed and you're ready for direct and manage is really just implementation test and operational readiness. So it's all of those that now, like, I have a sound design, I have a team ready assigned to each piece of this schedule that will deliver this solution. Now I just need to execute that. And that's direct and manage. And then post-deployment is, it's in production. I just really need to get myself ready to close this project out. As I mentioned at the bottom, you have the estimate maturity. Estimate maturity helps respect the fact that you don't have all the information at every stage. So when you're early on, you have less information about your vendor, about your solution, about your requirements, about testing complications, about environment complications, about integration requirements, about, just so many things. You don't have all that information when you do the business case. So you're not going to be able to create an estimate that is plus or minus 10% when you're in business case. The reason you don't want to figure all of that out before you submit a business case is if that business case doesn't get funded, you've now invested all of these phases and all of this work. For a company that gets its revenue based on capital investments, you don't want to invest because you can't capitalize it until you have a project. If you invest all of that time up front to get an extremely refined estimate, you're missing an opportunity to make a case to get that revenue built in from your ratepayers and in a rate case, because it's all operational cost. Once it's capital and it's actually a capital asset investment, then you can get that back. So you want to make sure you're not going all the way to design before you submit a business case, because you're over investing in a non-capital investment. And based on the way utility companies get their revenue, that hurts more than helps. So this estimate maturity is really to set expectations based on the information at this stage that you have, so you don't overinvest in something that you can't capitalize and can't recover from your ratepayers. So once you get past project initiation and you have a high level design, that high level design and understanding requirements allows you to refine that estimate somewhat. Once you have a design and you're already, you know exactly what you're going to do, you can get pretty close. I would say you're probably then at least minus and plus 10% in your estimate. Make sure you understand the minus as well. It's not okay to go 50% under, because that's dollars that could have been spent somewhere else that's being held up in your project. So you don't want to say, oh, it's $1 million project, but I could probably get it done in 500,000, but I'm not going to release that 500,000 until the very end. That is just as bad as saying, okay, now I need 500,000 more, because that's 500,000 that will not get spent, that could have been spent on something else and now cannot be recovered either. So, at this point, this is really setting a plus or minus expectation about how accurate your estimate should be. So after design, you should be able to create an extremely refined schedule for the rest of your projects. You know who's doing it, what needs to be done, when you need to get that done. You should have very clear estimates based on having all of this information. So this is the place where you should be, kind of really plus or minus 10% in your estimate. And that's why we call it definitive estimate gate, is because that's where you should have, besides the things that are covered in your risk, you should have a very refined plan and a very refined estimate. And then the rest is executing it. So you may have issues that occur. They should be as a result of a risk that you've already documented and that you're estimating contingency budget to cover. So the issues should be covered based on your contingency. So that's the estimate maturity at the bottom. You don't want to bring in a vendor, estimate to plus or minus 10% in business case here, and then overinvest early. This is the waterfall, but there's also one for Agile. Agile, the first 3 stages are exactly the same, because as far as I'm aware, there is no Agile funding that exists at BSCG. Funding in general is all waterfall, even if you're doing it in phases. They may release dollars in phases, but it is by no means an Agile funding process. So really,
Hey Sharon, before we get too far into this flow, can we address the question? We have a question in the chat around cybersecurity involvement and where it fits into the stage gates, as well as Center of Excellence Architectural Review Board. Can we go back to waterfall and engage those 2 questions?
After this, if we could just flow through, and then I can come back to these slides. I'm a little concerned we may miss our time if we answer all the questions in between, but
okay,
I'll come to this one. So, so cyber, as you can see, there's a cyber risk assessment, security architecture review, security architect, and these have templates which sit in the tools and templates directory. So when you get to project initiation, you pull that cyber risk, and in there it gives directions on how to submit that and how to engage cyber. Same for security architecture review. And then that's where you get the sign off once you have a full design. And then that, based on that design, they'll let you know if there's anything additional that they'll need from you. So as you can see, it's built into the checklist across all the stages, starting with project initiation, meaning now it's approved, let's start engaging cyber. So that's kind of how we get cyber engaged in there. Center of Excellence Architecture Review Board. I don't know what that is. I
I
think
didn't think you did. So,
I think
so
it's,
hey,
I
this,
think it's
yeah,
no longer
Patrick,
in place.
it is in place. And in fact, it's new, and there's a separate process for this, also with the cyber review. I forget what they're calling it, the CSRC or something like that. But there are these two new committees that are reviewing, they're reviewing designs.
Yeah, so
And
that's
so
this. That's this.
not only,
So-
but it's not. Yeah, hold on, let me finish. But it's not just designs. They want things ahead of time that you would normally do in your execution phase. Like, they don't necessarily want just designs. They want you to do proof of concepts and some other things. In other words, do some of the design work so they can go back and check it. And that doesn't follow your gate process.
It does. So
Not if you get to design, need an approval before you start to execute, right, under direct and manage. They're wanting to execute before you can get to direct and manage.
So proof of concept.
Or they provide their approvals. Yeah.
Proof of
And we can
concept.
take it offline. We can take it offline. This is I know this is newer.
It's just
I
a
don't know if
governing
it's-
body though. It's just a governing body. So we worked with cyber on these, like as recently as like last month, to say, how do we get it in good? Like a proof of concept is part of design. If it's created as like a pilot. A pilot is usually in design because you're going to make design changes based on what comes out of that. So if they have requirements like that that are coming out, Patrick, it's just additional requirements that are like here that could
Yeah, but it involves funding. So
that's
for instance,
possible.
I'm being asked to add $1 million to my project to
Totally
fund these
possible.
everything.
I know several projects that additional security tests were required, like pen testing, that they did not account for with external vendors, and they're having to do a PCR for that.
So we're focusing on the wrong group. It's not security so much. It's architecture review board.
So yeah, that's cyber. So that's all of these.
Okay.
I didn't know it was the review board they were calling it that's doing that. But
Yeah, there's a whole process in SharePoint site, different templates, a whole different process. It doesn't necessarily, I don't know if it contradicts this process flow.
Yeah, what I'm
but it's
telling you is
something that
we've been
needs to be
working with cyber to integrate it here. So
Okay,
even though they have the review board and have the process, the templates in here should match what you have to do for an IT project. So we've been working with them, and I know who you're referring to because KPMG is helping to put some of that in place as well. So I don't think it's a separate process. I don't think it's separate folks. I think the audience of these deliverables is that review board that you're referring to. I didn't know that's what they were calling it, but the audience is this. The cyber requirements for security projects is to do these. Now they may review your information you're providing here and ask for more stuff, ask you to do more things than you originally had in your plan. And then it's a PCR, right? Like it's a change request. It's already happening on several projects. It's not a disconnect though. It is the same things you're seeing here. It's the same templates. Because the cyber folks that are working on that reached out to us and said, hey, we want to make some revisions to these templates. How do we coordinate that with the PMO? So it's not totally different.
I think there's some miscommunication going on.
Okay, so let's take that offline, and then if we can, Salita, just focus on getting through material, and then we'll circle back to these, because some of these may require a session outside, if that's okay. Does that work, Salita?
Sure, Sharon. And we have captured that as a follow-up item, so we can go ahead and move.
Thank you.
Discussion.
Okay. All right. So we'll going forward, please just enter them in the chat and we'll circle back. I want to make sure we get through all the material though. So answering the questions in between, just kind of, I'm a little concerned we won't get through it all. And then agile, as I said, it's you have essentially plan, sprint, release, and refine, which are your agile stages. And then you can potentially have to keep, continually going through this project readiness gate as you roll things out. So it's really the same up until you get to project initiation. You'll notice some of the deliverables start to change a little to reflect like minimum viable product, which is not really a waterfall term. So some of these templates and some of these deliverables will change to fit more of an agile project. So like your groom backlog, user stories, and so forth. Because you're not really going to stop at a gate, even though you see these gates, you don't really stop at a gate in the middle of your sprints. However, once you're about 20% of your sprints in, you do stop and do a definitive estimate gate. So you would actually go through a gate about 20% into your sprints. That's when the assumption is that you would be in a place to really be at this estimate maturity, because you're so far along with your sprints and your sprint planning that you really should be at a place where you can say, okay, I'm going to check in and make sure my estimates are still, in the right place. That's really the only difference there. Again, I said, your deliverable templates, we'll send this out. There's a link to them. As I mentioned, there's the cyber risk assessment questionnaire and the security architecture review. There's your executive steering committee templates, deployment management plan template, your project is, so all of those, you'll start to see the templates in here. Stage gate categorization and SDLC determination. So as I mentioned, you're going to want to tailor it down if it doesn't require this amount of rigor in your project management deliverables. So that could be I showed you how you can tailor it just based on your SDLC consideration. So you're going to hit agile deliverables versus waterfall deliverables, or potentially, your waterfall deliverables are pretty much the same as if you're doing, a phased approach or iterative, that kind of thing. It's kind of mini versions, right? Categorization is really one where you want to look at the factors about your project to determine the amount of rigor. So we did, and just so you know, we did put some considerations for, do you do waterfall or do you do iterative? You should have a say in that. You should be able to have that conversation with your sponsor or your GPM. If they're saying this is agile, but it really doesn't fit an agile methodology, that's a conversation that you can have even with the PMO. The categorization matrix really looks at factors, complexity factors about your project to determine, is it formal, informal, miscellaneous, or annual and routine? And this is going to drive which deliverables are required for your project and which are optional. So really it's your riskier, highly complex, whether it's size, and it could be that you have a $10 million project, but it's all hardware and not very complex. And in which case you wouldn't consider a $10 million project formal gated if you're not redesigning anything, if it's just a big hardware purchase. So that's a conversation you can have with the PMO to say, I don't think this is formal gated and this is why. And they should be able to, agree or disagree, have that conversation to set the category for your project. Visibility, financial management. So it's a lot of normal things. Is this new technology to PSEG? Does it have a lot of integration? How complex is the solution? If it's a risky, visible project with a big investment, you should be formal gated and you're going to be required to deliver all of the items in the checklist. So once you have, you've done that categorization, you're comfortable, which of these you fall into, that's when you can start doing tailoring. So by tailoring, what you can do is come into that so this list matches the deliverables in that checklist underneath each stage. And that's where you can say, okay, if this is formal gated, which deliverables do I need? If I'm a annual routine project, as you could see, a lot of these deliverables are optional. If you're not redesigning anything, you're not, putting anything into our environments that hasn't already been tested and proven. And, a lot of cases, maybe just another geographical location or just adding, another user base onto some existing solution. So in those cases, you really, as you could see, a lot of the deliverables are optional. So you can tailor them down. If it's a $100,000 project, also optional. It's based on what your project needs are. You may have to do a design, but you may not want to have like that full template in place when you do that. That's much more complex. So this is how you tailor it down. We have one for Agile as well. Okay, and then how do you put it into action? So as I mentioned earlier, you have to go through the gates. There is a process for going through the gates. So for it, like as you finish a stage and you're ready to go through a gate approval process, there is a scorecard which you would fill out, and it's one scorecard per project that has all the stages in it. In that scorecard, you'll be able to say, yes, I've completed my deliverables, or if there's a reason you're not doing it, you can make that case in there as well. You'll complete that, put it on SharePoint, and then notify the ops team. The ops team will review your deliverables, make sure they're complete, and will notify you you're good to move forward. Have a conversation with your steering committee. And this is the conversation I said, where you're at the gate. And it's not just about everything's done. It's about, based on the information we have, do we want to keep moving along with the original plan? So you would meet with your steering committee, say, I'm moving to the next stage. This is, the things that are different than I knew from the last time. Are we all so good? Are we all still moving forward? Once you have that, you just upload it, and then you'll go back to your scorecard when you're ready to cross the next gate. So this is the first tab on the scorecard, and it really just gives you directions on how to use it. This is your scorecard sort of dashboard. As you can see, it goes across all the different stages. As you cross gates, you'll start to see these get filled out, and you'll start to see 100%. So this really reflects which gates you've already been through. For each stage, you would just, go through and mark your status of what's done, and then it would feed back to these totals. So you're not actually creating these totals, you're just filling out these different scorecard tabs, and then it'll generate your percentage complete here. And you have one for each. Okay, so that's all we had for, that's all we had for stage gate. So just to go back and see what questions we missed, can you, Salita, tell me which questions you think we should address?
Sure, Sharon. We have a question. What is the process for projects that use Agile development for the application, as an example, and waterfall for integration?
So in that case, I mean, you would, in some cases, have to do both, right? Like if you think about integration, so think about looking at what's on here, right? For if your integration is waterfall, you're still going to have to have requirements for your integration. You're still going to have design. You may be able to tailor that down because that now may be like a category that's smaller, but you're not going to roll out integrations you haven't designed or you don't have requirements for, right? So all that means is you're going to have to blend these two. So for your application, you're going to have, backlog, user stories, you're going to be going through your sprint scope, but for your integrations, you're going to want to add in here your high level design, your detailed requirements, your design specs for those integrations. So essentially you're going to end up creating a hybrid of these two.
Yeah, so this is Patrick again, and these are going to come up more and more often. You've got AMI coming up that's going to use this approach, OMS that uses this approach, and some others that are going to be using this combo type thing. This isn't unusual. So we may leave that doesn't flow. That's fine on your waterfall and your agile process flow here, but it doesn't fit your scorecard.
True. Yeah, that's a good point. And we probably need to take that away, Salita. That scorecard probably. needs
So
to be
I'm just,
updated.
and look, I'm not trying to be a problem child here. These are coming up because these are big projects. So like mine, for instance, it's a 3.5-year project. And mine is going to be probably a 1.5 years. And some others that take a long time. And on top of that, these processes that the PMO will mature during those timelines. We need to figure out how to handle that too as those mature and things change, what the new requirements are for stage gates, for instance.
And today,
And how
Patrick,
that,
quite
and how that
honestly, it's not a huge
Yeah.
deal. Like your scorecard, we just copy in those rows and refine the scorecard to fit this. I don't think it's like, it's still
Well,
fundamentally, you're doing the same thing. It's just that you may need to add more rows to the scorecard versus like, it's.
I think you and I are on the same page. I think some of the other folks that are out there may not be. And again, we can take it offline. There are some folks that are being super, like super duper strict about this and are freaked out about these scorecards and these processes and things. And you know, I'm a seasoned PM. I've been doing this over 20 years and a variety of projects. So this going through these isn't new. But there are some folks that I think this is new at PSEG, and I think they just need some help with that. And so just a comment, but it's something I think that maybe add to your PowerPoint here about, hey, there may be some exceptions, like you said. There may be some things that we have to tailor, like combination type things, because they're going to become a little bit more common.
Are you attending the GPM forum, Patrick?
I don't have an opportunity to right now.
Okay,
I am completely over allocated.
Because that's where they're getting the feedback that you just mentioned. So they're looking for that feedback, and so what they're doing is then they're creating a list of improvement to the assets based on the feedback from the PMs and the GPMs. And then they're taking that and coming up with an action plan, which then there's a process for doing release management to the assets to then go in, factor those in, prioritize them, make those updates to the assets, and then roll that out like with some change management to the PMs and GPMs. So the goal of that was to make that an ongoing improvement process so that as new scenarios come about, as new, complications and projects come along, you're addressing that on an ongoing basis with the understanding that, this was the foundation that was created. So those are the
I
kind
appreciate
of things.
that. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm aware of the forums. Unfortunately, those timelines don't fit into meeting times that I can attend because I have 8 vendors on a project, 6 status reports. I've got 50.
So I recommend that if you're not able to make that you send that over to that IT EPMO, the IT EPMO team, or they have the Thursdays, office hours too, and ask them to incorporate that into that PM GPM feedback list.
Okay, that's fair. Do you have a slide somewhere that has, because I didn't see that at the very beginning, where the PMO site is, where these contacts are, and maybe I missed it?
Yeah, that was part of the intro, but let me go see if I can get that.
I just want to make sure, if it's already listed, fine, and we're going to be able to get to it, that's okay. I just want to make sure we had all those contacts in these forums and these things and these opportunities.
Patrick, we'll also drop the contact information in the chat. You can retrieve it from there as well. I'll drop it in there in a moment.
I'm just wondering, it needs to be more visible on the ITPMO homepage, right? Like
It's all-
I don't know
it's
if
all
all this
on
is
there.
on the,
It is. It's
Yeah,
all
this-
on there. So this was, so as you can see here, this is the homepage. Here's who you contact.
yeah,
Here's
okay.
the training.
It's super
which
tiny on
includes
my
the-
screen, so that's why I probably missed it.
Yeah, and then, you know, the SharePoint site link is here, and this is just a picture of the SharePoint site. So if
Yeah,
you click on
understood.
this link, yeah. But all of that is available. I also, in the intro, went through here some of your, so you can even enter a ServiceNow ticket, you can attend the
Yeah, I
office
got
hours.
that.
Okay. So, but that is, so the point of that PM GPM forum, Patrick, was we're starting to hear from PMs that, hey, either I have nuances in my project that doesn't quite fit what you have, or it's things that we haven't created yet, right? Like they're a part of the roadmap, and then ramping up the team slowed down the progression of the capabilities and designing that stuff. So it may just need to be added. So that forum was really about, like, for example, a very good recommendation that came out of that was to take this stage gate, you know, flow, and then link in all the templates, and then even identify who's responsible for which of these, right? Who on the team, you know, who's responsible for doing
Yeah,
it.
racing. Yeah.
Right. So that was something that came out of one of the first ones that the ops team then, you know, put all of that together and then made that as part of the next release. And the goal of that is to be that on an ongoing basis, as PMs find exactly what you guys are mentioning here, that's being taken off and then being addressed by the ops team in a methodical way with a plan. So it's not like it gets lost out there. They have a list, and that was even one of the suggestions is, you know, how does the ops team gonna make sure nothing gets lost? Like all these suggestions coming from PMs. So they actually have a list of improvements to this stuff that they're, you know, going through one by one and getting added. So, you know, for folks on the call, you know, if you can attend that PM GPM forum, please do. If you click on the training calendar in the SharePoint site, you can even just click on it and get the link added to your calendar for that. But it's a monthly forum. They give updates on the stuff that was requested in previous sessions to kind of say, hey, we heard you, this is what we're doing, this is when you're going to see it. And then some of that even drives like some of these special PMO sessions where, you know, like the utilities financial one, or, you know, where people are like, hey, I want to see a preview of what this new PTS tool will do, you know, that kind of thing. So some of that is even driving those special topics that end up on the training calendar. So if you can attend that session, give your feedback, the ops team has committed to keeping track of that feedback and then making sure that you know it's being addressed and when it's being addressed and then how it's being addressed. So, you know, so you can see the actual changes that result from your feedback. So that was the goal of that, because by no means do we think we nailed it with this first iteration for every possible type of project you have and every type of issue that you could come across. This is meant to be a framework. It's meant to be tailored. It's meant to be, you know, revised. And then as you have nuances and you need help addressing those nuances, that's what the ops team is there to do. But I totally hear you, Patrick. It's not going to cover all of that. And there's definitely improvements that need to be made. For the cyber one, we have worked very closely with that cyber team and tried to connect that. So I think the problem with that one may be getting the language consistent across the two. And then where, quite honestly, what I'm understanding is that stuff they're asking for and those review outputs differ from project to project. There is no standard, like, this is what we need every time. I even mentioned that to the last time we met with the cyber folks is, you know, people can't plan for the budget stuff, for the budget that's required for even pen testing and things like that. if you don't tell them what they need to do until they're already like ready to start rolling something out. Cyber's response to that is generally, we can't tell you what you need until we see a full design, which means you're at the end of design before you have any idea you're going to be hit with this additional cost. You're going to be hit with these additional requirements. You're going to be hit, you know, hey, you got to add a whole proof of concept in here, that kind of thing. It's too far down the road. We've said that to them. And the response to that is, that's kind of how this stuff works. So we said, okay, well, is there any way you can help us understand what factors you're looking for in design? So that maybe up front in, you know, that initial design stage or project initiation, we can say, if you have these types of things, you're probably going to need additional proof of concept. You're probably going to need additional pen testing. You're probably going to need, you know, so what are those factors that you're seeing and thinking, okay, that means you need something additional? How can we get PMs informed up front? So they're looking out for that. So it's not like blindsided after your detailed design is done. But that is something we know is happening. We've tried to work with them. But the other piece is how long it takes to get those review results back from, I guess, that board. I didn't realize that was the name of the board, but to get the review, you know, stuff back, because they keep asking for more information. It becomes like a loop that you don't know when it's going to end. And you can't move forward without getting their sign off. So that was another thing that we talked to them about. And I think they're struggling with resources and trying to ramp up to accommodate that and get that done quicker. But it's a little, they do have SLAs, but it's a little unpredictable based on the back and forth of requesting additional information. It's more art than science is what I've seen.
So who can I schedule a meeting with EPMO? Is that you to talk about that process?
Yeah, I would say me, Upasana, and I think quite honestly, Patrick, I think we'd want to pull in the folks that are designing that on the cyber side that we've been working with. And that,
well, we're already talking to them. They're disorganized. So they can't tell us what they want, and we're educating them. I'm speaking frank. So
yeah.
it is what it is. We're educating them on AWS. We're educating them on things that they don't know, and that's not our responsibility. That's not what a review board does. They should have their definitions and know what to ask for and how and what. But
yeah, and we're hearing these
like
things from everybody.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd like to. We're already working with Bindu and Mesh and a couple others, but I think there needs to be a PMO separate discussion, and then there
so
needs
I would
to be,
say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I would say Rich and Upasana are definitely needed for that. Let's go with Upasana first. But Rich has also been trying to work with the cyber team to work.
Oh yeah, Rich is already involved. He knows everything about what I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, and so, I think this is the same thing we're hearing from lots of folks. We keep trying to, you know, it is all integrated, you know, so we are integrating. The problem is that the stuff you're seeing in the stage gate process is the only part that's standard, like that for every project you have to do this. What we're hearing is the rest of it is just like whatever they come up with after they start speaking to you.
Yes. So I think we're on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's a challenge with multiple.
Yeah, and
outside help.
And I,
like almost got.
Yeah, no, it does. And I don't think anyone on this call or any PM or anyone PMO or cyber for that matter want to do anything wrong or skate a process. Everyone wants to do it the right way. It's just getting in an organized structure to make sure it doesn't impede our project progress. Yeah. And I think it's always a balance. Yeah. And it's working through that balance is all. So
yeah. And honestly,
but I didn't know. I can send you. I'll send you a link. Okay. Or I could put it in the chat too for the ARB so you all know what that link is. And you've got it.
Like I said, I know the folks that are working on that because one of them reached out to me and said, who do I work with to get the templates updated and that design that process? So we probably just need to make sure that happen. And it may be something that's on Upasana's list to do some updates and it hasn't been done yet. So let's meet with her first.
Gotcha.
But it is good for everyone on this call to be aware of, because if you have anything, you know, your designs will have to go through review with that cyber team. As you know, cybersecurity is like one of the risk associated with the solutions we're putting in place is the hottest topic that exists for us right now. So it's important that you understand like the potential complications you could have from a cyber review standpoint, or delays or additional costs. If I were you, I'd already be carrying risk on my projects for that.
And also a point to note that is cybersecurity always works with third-party vendors to get some reviews done. Not only they review, they actually go to the outside party, and we had delays like months and months just because the other party is getting back late. And there's nothing you can do. Once you're in, you have to wait for their results, and you know, then only cybersecurity will approve it. And we really had to like work through that and get conditional approvals for our phase 1 and then go through it, because it was like out of our hands, and the other party guys were like sick for some time, not reachable for some time. So yeah, there are so many other risks that you have to consider when especially reviewing with security for architecture and anything.
Yes, so I'd be carrying risk. I'd be planning some float in your schedule for these things, especially if you're doing anything that you think would be cyber sensitive or new design, new tools, you know, external data, anything like that. Like I would definitely consider that. And I mean, we've already had some projects basically die after like into testing because the business decided not to fund the additional cyber requirements that came through. So the project got canceled. So that's possible, just so you know. And it was a pretty heavy investment, which is surprising, but that did happen. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to the status reporting and then do portfolio, and then we'll take a break. All right, so status reporting. So one of the most glaring things we saw when we started this journey last October, and one of the things I think the CIDO noticed is there is no standard way to do status reporting, and there's no way to roll it up to a dashboard. So essentially, everybody's using their own methods, tools, definitions, and we have no way to say at a portfolio level, how are we performing? So, you know, we can do portfolio health dashboards only because PMs are doing consistent status reporting. That is the only way that works, obviously. Otherwise, we don't have any way to roll that up to a portfolio level. So this was a high priority when we first started, because there was status reporting, but it wasn't apples to apples. Like we didn't know, what did you mean by green? What did you mean by red? What did you mean by yellow? And you know, some PMs were, you know, great about being very transparent and saying, hey, here's what's happening. Here's where my problems are. Can you help me? You know, or at least I want to make you aware. And then other PMs were more on the, you know, subscribe to the, I'll let you know when it's like a big problem. I'll just keep it green. We call it the watermelon effect. You know, I'll keep it green until it's like red, till things are stopped. And you need to know. I will tell you, the leadership here has expressed on multiple occasions, they would rather you be yellow and they know about it than be green and they don't find out until you're all the way down, you know, with your project completely off the rails. So transparency is important. It's okay to be yellow if you have a good story for it, right? Like, this is what's happening. This is the risk. This is the things I'm doing to bring us back on track. Here's where I need your help. That kind of thing. But transparency is extremely important. And you'll find that it is very much frowned upon here to go from green to red with no warning that there was ever, you know, something that could potentially throw your project off track. just from a high level standpoint, so, you know, you have your own project status meetings whenever they occur. And then on a bi-weekly basis, you should be producing a status report on the first and third Friday of every month. The first Friday's status report is usually the one that feeds into this portfolio health review process that I'll talk about. But on some occasions where the portfolio health review session gets delayed, they may pick up your third. So it is equally important to do both, because sometimes they get moved and a different one could end up getting picked up for the portfolio health review session. We'll send this out. I'm not going to go through this exactly. I mean, it's kind of in the slides that'll come after this, but essentially in ServiceNow is where you're delivering that. And then I'll go through each of these tabs that you're updating. So once you
Hey,
get
want to let you know,
Sure,
we're
go
not
ahead.
we're not seeing the screen. We're just seeing you talk.
Oh, interesting. It says I'm
You look great talking,
Thank
but we
you.
can't see the screen.
I'm looking at the screen, so, you know, I just assumed you guys are following along. The good news is the slides were not that interesting that I was showing. It was just really the words I was saying. So it starts to get better now. But thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. Okay, so this was kind of the slide right before, so it goes through, but it's pretty much what I'm going to cover in the following slides. So you go into ServiceNow, there's a project status portal under project portfolio management. Hopefully you guys all have access to your projects in that project portfolio management section. There's a project status portal, and this is where you're going to enter your project status reports. Under that, you'll be able to select projects and then my status reports. Then you can do insert, which is over here on the right. Once you're in that, your status reports, and that'll allow you to create a new status report. Once you're in that new status report, it will automatically set to initial status of pending, and set a status date of the most recent date that you created it. Across these tabs is where you're going to enter your status report. However, the first 4 tabs are pre-populated with data that already exists on your project in ServiceNow. So it is a good idea to go through and review those for accuracy, because that information does get pulled into Portfolio Health dashboard. So if your project date says you're ending 12/31/2021, and you know you're extending to 12/31/2022, we need to know that. So review this. If you don't know how to get those, like that information updated, reach out to the PMO so someone can help you navigate how to get it updated in the tool. But the first 4 tabs here are ones that you should review, but they are coming from somewhere else. So once you get through reviewing these and resolving any data issues you may find, hopefully none, then we normally recommend you start with schedule. So once you're looking at the schedule, you'll see there's a color that you set manually as well as comments. The color is set based on green, meaning there's no major risk to your current schedule and you're on track. If you have any risk that have a probability of 50% or more to impact your project from a schedule perspective, meaning delaying your delivery date, you're going to want to switch that to yellow. Again, this doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. This means you're keeping your leadership informed that there's a risk out there that, you know, you could end up having to move a delivery date. And I would make sure your comments reflect not just that you have this risk, but what are you doing to mitigate the risk? Who's involved, and what date will you know for certain whether this is going to impact your project or not? So be very specific information that you put. This is not specific, so we need to change this example. I apologize. I just noticed what they put in there. And then red means that an issue is impacting delivery and that you're going to have to do a change request that date out. So just things to consider, or is there anything impacting your project? So these are just comments that you want to think about as you're putting them in there. I will say, if you have a risk and it's over 50% and you're yellow, how I would frame the comments here would be, there's a risk that this vendor, is delayed. They're currently trying to parallel some work. They had a resource, that left the company. They're trying to parallel some of the work. They've found another resource. We'll know by end of this week if they're able to recover. If not, here's the things as the PM, I'm pursuing either another vendor, I'm pursuing help from another, whatever it is you're doing to mitigate it or try and get it on track, make that clear, make clear the dates that you think you'll have an answer as to whether it's going to impact you or not. But that's what I would include in this section. And quite honestly, if once you sit in on the portfolio health pre-sessions to review the information, that's the kind of questions you're going to get asked. So I would preemptively put it in the comments. Cost is, the next tab, very similar. You're just really looking at, are you on track? Are there any major risks that could throw you off track that are worth a discussion in this portfolio health review, or at least to make leadership aware of? If you are going to have to do a change request or a justification, you are red. And your reason for turning back green isn't I did a justification. Because if you haven't resolved the risk and it could turn you red again, you want to make sure you're bringing that to light. So when you think about turning red, it's not, oh, I'm just red until next week when my justification gets approved. It's like, no, I'm red until next week because we have resolved the issue and we do not expect this issue to hit us again. And therefore, so a lot of what I tend to hear is, I'm red now, but I'll be green next week because of a PCR. PCR does not turn you green. Resolving the issue turns you green. So talk about that. Talk about the issue you resolved and how it's not going to hit you again further down, or potentially it is. And in which case, then you should probably, even if you fill out your PCR, it should be at least yellow because there's a chance this could hit you again later. And you want to make sure you're having that conversation in these portfolio health sessions. Resource status, this is a very common one, I think, here, especially if you involve any security, infrastructure, or cyber resources. There's a lot of constraints in those areas. So this is the place to talk about this. I will tell you this is a good conversation to have in your portfolio health reviews, especially the session with senior leadership, because if someone is holding you up, you want to bring it to light to see if you can't get them to help remove those barriers. So either they can prioritize your project up, or they can say, okay, we know you're doing everything you can. There's nothing you can do with the fact that we don't have anyone. We can't contract this particular skill set. Let's leave it yellow until we know if we're able to make these dates or not. So you have the right audience in those sessions to bring up resource issues, because these are the folks that own the resources, at least in IT. So, or may have the relationships with the business that owns the resources in other areas that you need. So I would say definitely take the opportunity to voice if you have resource constraints or resource concerns in your status report. The next is scope, and this is generally around, you have business requirements, they're signed off, or you're not even past that, and you're just, the original business case was defined to be Long Island and New Jersey or whatever, and you're finding out that, they may not be able to roll this out in a certain area, or they want to add additional functionality that wasn't originally, whatever it is, this is the place to kind of voice that. And again, this is based on the risk that your scope could be increased or decreased. So if you're going to take things out, also important to note, because it may take away the benefits that were articulated in the business case, and still not really give you it's still important for the leadership to understand they're not necessarily going to get what they originally signed up for. Okay, and then the next is the overall status. Sorry about that. Is the overall status, which is actually before the schedule tab here. So once you go through that, if any of them are yellow, make it yellow. If any are red, make it red. If everything's green, then it's green. And, you know, essentially then you would just talk through overall where you are with the project, but what's making it yellow, red, yellow or red, as well as what you're doing to work through that issue, and specifically what help the leadership can potentially give you in that case. So sometimes it's like a vendor management issue and supply chain's not really, you know, helping, and you need someone who can reach out, who, you know, has a little bit more escalation power with that particular vendor. This is a good place to bring that up, because you'll have the audience that could potentially hear that and then call up the right person and get your stuff moving, or, you know, that kind of thing. Or if it's sitting waiting on a contract and we can't figure out where it is, this is the folks that can potentially give you the contacts to get your stuff moving. So I would not shy away from being very clear about what help you think the IT leadership can give you to keep your project moving forward. And also be prepared to talk about what you've already done or what you are doing to mitigate it. So there's just some, these are just things that you really, in the overall status here, when you're going through executive summary and comments, just things you should be thinking about. Like, you know, do you have contingency? Have you used all your contingency and all your budget and float? And if so, you want to make sure it's clear that, like, essentially your risk are not supported at this point. Hopefully you're at the point in your project where you have less risk, impact probability and so forth. But if you're not, you know, make sure folks understand that you're in a very risky situation, and any change or any issue in your project could affect your overall potential delivery dates, as well as planned budgets and things like that. So really think about that kind of stuff as you're putting that together. The rest are pretty straightforward. Last week's accomplishments, key activities planned. I would be very brief, make them bullets, and make it very concise and executive audience worthy. So don't get it in the details of things that, you know, as an executive, they may not know what you're referring to. And when I say this, like, you know, your infrastructure tower lead may, but, you know, one of your other tower leads may not. I would be very concise, succinct, and keep it at an executive level. And then risk reporting, and I'll go through this more in detail as to what's expected to include, but when you're submitting your status reports, you should also be updating your risk in ServiceNow to make sure they have the most accurate information and the most recent information. I would also say this is something you should be doing on a weekly basis. You should be thinking about what could go wrong in your project, at least on a weekly basis, and getting that documented. And you will find going into 2022 is another item they have on the list, is starting to do risk reporting compliance. So they're going to start looking at, the ops team is going to start looking at who's actually updating their risk and doing quantitative risk assessments and, you know, really managing their risk. So if you don't touch this log for months, it's very clear that you're not on a weekly basis thinking about everything that can go wrong, because I haven't seen an IT project yet where nothing changes from your risk perspective on a month-to-month basis. If you have one risk out here and it's a $5 million investment, probably not inclusive of all the risks that exist, that kind of thing. So this is where you would add your risk under the risk, and then there's a new button there. Once you have completed your status report, you will notify your GPM that they need to approve it. And then you can click save, update. And then once your GPM has approved it or rejected it, you can change that status. Okay, and that was it for status reporting. Any questions on how to submit your status report? I don't see anything in chat.
So quick question.
Sure,
So
go ahead.
I looked up my project in Snow because I haven't, one, I didn't have access until a couple of days ago
Okay.
in Snow. And then two, who's responsible for updating the details for the project so I could, for instance, add a status or maintain my risk? Because the old project managers listed, the original scheduler, which is 2 schedulers ago now, is still listed. So who's responsible for that?
Project details is my understanding the PM updates those, but it's, so the thing about
PM
ServiceNow,
Yeah.
the thing about ServiceNow is it's a field by field security setting. So
Yep.
I try to go in and update the controller, and I don't have access to some of the projects to update controller based on the status. So it's kind of like the PM needs to move it forward, then I can go in and update the controller type thing. So if you're having any challenges as the PM, I would say reach out to the PMO so that someone can work through. So I hate to say it, but it gets even more complicated in that the ServiceNow support of that project area is different depending on the issue. So sometimes it's the ServiceNow folks, and sometimes it's the PMO can do something to, correct access or things like that. So I would go to the PMO first. But the PM, it's my understanding, is responsible for keeping all of the project details up to date.
Yeah, in this case, the PM's gone. So she was like,
So we probably need them to
So-
update the PM, and then that would hopefully give access to the right
yeah,
person.
that's what I'm hoping. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a note out, actually, the group product manager. I think he's the last one that updated some of this, but
Okay.
I was curious. I didn't know if anyone else ran into this kind of problem.
I would
Did you
imagine.
talk-
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I said, I've had it as the person trying to put the controller assignments in. I haven't had it from a PM perspective.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions before we talk about portfolio health? All right, so your project status reporting, this will be quick and we'll take a break. Your project status reports are extracted from ServiceNow. Like I said, usually the first one of the month, depending on if that gets delayed, sometimes the third one. So whichever one is right before those portfolio health prep sessions and then the portfolio health meeting with the senior leadership, they'll pull that from ServiceNow. It's a bunch of massaging, a bunch of reviews, and then there's prep sessions that are set up to get additional information and get ready for that executive and senior leadership conversation. So here is the process flow that exists. So you submit your status report, as I said, and the GPM reviews that and approves it. There is an email that goes out requesting those to be updated. So there's a reminder sent from the PMO every, right before they're due. That information gets extracted by the PMO, as I said, and gets put in this prep material. They review it. There's a whole review process that happens in the PMO to look for like potential questions that need to be asked in that prep session. And then Energy Cloud is a little bit outside. So Energy Cloud program, because they have so many levels of status reporting and review process, they're kind of handled a little bit different. They do roll into the final deck that goes, but they have a little bit of a different process for getting that information together. There's a status report assessment that's done. Any additional follow-up that's needed, the PMO will then reach out, work with you to get those updates made. And then we'll email the project teams the status assessment notes. They can make edits. You can make edits in ServiceNow to your project status report to reflect potentially they notice a gap in information or something missing or something that's not clear. They'll send you those comments and you can make your updates in ServiceNow. And then Upasana then takes that information and she creates some notes across the board that then feed into the prep session. So every month, so I think it's the second week, all of this, once you submit the first week, second week, all of this is happening. Third week is the portfolio health prep meetings. So you'll get a copy of the material that's going to go in, and there'll be some notes from Upasana that you'll talk through in that prep meeting. So the PMO will distribute that out. Prep meetings, like I said, are usually, I think it's the third week. And then after those meetings, all of that information or any changes that need to be made will be made, and then they'll distribute the final material, which will then go to the CIDO and the senior leadership team for a review meeting that is scheduled once a month. So as the PM, you should be invited to, and the prep meetings are set by tower. So as the PM, you should be invited to your tower's prep meeting, and then the portfolio health meeting with senior leadership, just in case your project is one that needs to be discussed. So that's the high level process flow for that. Just some things to think about as you're doing your status reporting or questions that'll come out of those prep sessions. And to me, this is just good to think about before you submit your status report, or at least have answers to at minimum when you get to the prep session or the portfolio health session, because it is things that tend to come up a good bit. So once when you're looking at the schedule health indicator, if in your project information, you have a milestone that is, are they in the future or is it in the past? Like if it's already passed and you haven't explained that you're going to be updating that, or that, like review that information of your timeline and provide insight, right? So if it says 11:30, you are going to complete a milestone, you never completed it, give a reasonable explanation as to why that was the case. Don't just leave a date in the past out there. Either move it out or explain what's happening and when you're going to move it out. Like you're working through a commitment with your vendor and you don't really know the new date, but this is what's happening. So just the obvious things, right? Like you said something was going to happen, it didn't happen. Don't just let that pass over and then keep moving forward. You have to give an explanation of those things. Risk issues or decisions noted for escalation, that if there's something that is happening with that milestone, that there's a risk to it, there's an issue, decision need to be made, make sure you include those things. If it's red, be very clear as to your new estimate delivery date, or if you're still working through one, be clear as to when you will have a new estimate delivery date. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to let you guys know this material was out there. And it really is just questions to ask yourself as the PM to make sure you're providing the right level and the right amount of information. When you think about the risk, and we'll go through a risk session in that section, is it clear what can go wrong to prevent us from delivering on time or on budget? And don't forget within scope of the business case. So if we have cut scope somewhere to make it on time and on budget, and now we're not delivering exactly the scope to that business case, make sure that's something you're highlighting as a risk or issue as well. So these are just some questions that you can ask. The schedule and costs are pretty common. Change requests. So One really clear sign usually that risk management is a little bit lacking is you have a lot of change requests. And a lot of change requests where you don't document a risk, but then you have an impact of an issue. If it is an issue that is going to cause a change, you should have been managing a risk somewhere. In almost all cases, you should have knew there was a possibility, had conversation with the team. It shouldn't be risk just falling out of the air for your project. So, or if it's a lot of change requests, a lot of times that indicates that you had an issue, but you put in a change, but you never really resolved the issue. The issue or the risk still exists throughout your project. It wasn't really mitigated. You just keep changing the date or you just keep changing the budget based on, you know, whether the customer's requesting it or not. It's not really a valid thing to just say, oh, well, the business wanted to, well, the business, you know, as the PM, you know, it's going to be important that you're taking charge of that situation and that you're clear on how you're going to mitigate it. Or, you know, I mean, sometimes it is a persistent risk and there's not much you can do about it, but just make sure you're communicating that clearly so you don't get hit by this change request. I will tell you this particular executive is very sensitive to a bunch of change requests on a project. So if you're green, but you have 10 change requests, he's going to ask you about that. He's going to want to know what keeps happening. And is this really green or is it a red project that is plagued with issues that we haven't quite resolved yet? And we just keep moving the date out. We keep moving the budget out. So change requests and answering to the number of change requests is going to be important as well. So think about, have you truly mitigated the risk or resolved the issue when you do a change request, or is there a reason why you have so much change in this project? So this is one that I don't think everyone always thinks about, but is definitely sensitive for this particular executive. Overall, this is sort of like just summary level what's on those portfolio health reports. This is going to change continually based on what senior leadership wants to see and what things they care about. I fully think this is going to be very important going into next year as more adoption happens around the stage gate process. They're going to want to better appreciate what, so if they're in August and most of their projects haven't gotten past project initiation, the risk associated with delivering that entire portfolio goes up, right? So there's things you can derive from this type of information if you're an executive responsible for the entire portfolio, not just one project. So I think you're going to see this start to morph into information that those senior leadership cares about and is an indication on how well we're delivering the entire plan, not just one project. This is what the detailed level pages look like, organized by red, yellow, green. Again, don't try and stay off of the red page if your project is really red. Just be prepared to have a conversation about it. As you can see in the project status note, it's kind of a distilled version of that project portfolio prep meetings. So Upasana puts this in based on those conversations. And this is where you get, so if you can get your status report to be this specific, it probably eliminates a lot of conversation leading up to this, but continues to have issues with SAP. What are you doing to mitigate that? This talks about the escalation. This talks about any movement to date, any impact to cost. So as you can see, the conversation here gets very pointed at an executive level to tell them what's going wrong, what are we doing to fix it, and when do we think we'll know if it's fixed or not. And you'll see that consistently across the projects that fall into red and yellow. They also usually, just so you know, that portfolio health session usually has some retrospectives as well. So it's really good to be on that because you usually have like a project where a PM will come in or a GPM and talk about lessons learned from either a problem project or a model project or whatever it is, but it's good insight that you can take away for both understanding the risk associated with your project as well as things you can do to make your project more likely to be successful. So generally they have a retrospective in each one of those sessions that you can learn from. All right, I think that's it for this. I see something in the chat. No, that was just a dropping off. So why don't we go ahead and take a break? Our next session is going to be on risk. So why don't we get back together at 3:30 your time, and get started on the risk. Is that right? I'm sorry. Yeah, 3:30. And Artie, are we closing down this session and then logging back in for the recording purposes?
We don't need to close down this session. I can stop, yeah, the recording. That's it, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. We'll meet back together.